Today I'm going to talk to you about the kinds of punctuation marks that we can put between complete sentences. So in other words, I'm talking to you about the punctuation marks that allow us to have good boundaries between sentences. Before we start, I wanted to share with you a little bit of a fun fact about the two major punctuation marks we'll be talking about, the period and the semicolon. The first period, or the earliest use of the period, seems to have come from Greece sometime between 300 and 200 BCE. There were actually at the time 3 different kinds of periods. The first kind was what we call high dot, and the high dot kind of is the version that is most closely related to our period today. So the high dot marks the end of a thought and the end of a sentence. Then you could have a medium dot, which acts a little bit like the semicolon today. In other words, it marks a pause in thought, but not the end of a sentence. And then finally, the low dot would stand in for a shorter pause, so it would be sort of like a comma. So this is the punctuation mark that was most closely aligned to what we use the period to do. This one would stand in for what we now use a comma to do, and this one stands in for what we use a comma to do. Starting around 800 CE, scribes were professional writers, like people who literally wrote things because we didn't have printing presses. The scribes started to use only the low dot, but they used it as a period. So in other words, they got rid of the high dot, they got rid of the medium dot, and they only used the low dot. In 900, so about 100 years later, someone by the name of Ælfric the grammarian named this dot the period. So hat tip to Ælfric the grammarian. By the way, Ælfric means rich elf. I don't know why you would call someone rich elf, but that's what the name means. So then I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about a semicolon. A semicolon is a period over a comma. And the first printed semicolon happened in 1496 CE. The idea of the semicolon obviously existed before then, but it was represented by the medium dot. So the concept existed before the punctuation mark, but the punctuation mark started to show up in 1496. So I want to give you other examples of what a semicolon looks like in other languages. In Arabic, the semicolon is almost like, well, we would call it an upside down semicolon, but of course, I guess they would call our semicolon an upside down semicolon. In Ethiopic languages, this is what the semicolon looks like. And in Bamun languages, this is what the semicolon looks like. By the way, Bamun refers to the people who live in Cameroon, and it's also their written language. So, the period and the semicolon are the most neutral ways to divide a sentence. In other words, you're not giving any sort of opinion to your reader about how to think about the relationship between the two sentences. You're just saying to them either a hard stop, period, or you're saying to them, I need you to stop, but I also need you to keep moving on, which is the semicolon. So a period says to the reader, I'm done with the thought. You can pause. You might want to look back, make sure you understood what I said, and then go on to the next sentence. A semicolon, there, period means full stop. A semicolon says, I know that technically I'm at the end of a sentence, so grammatically I have completed a sentence, but I'm not done with the thought yet. So I need you to keep reading and to consider these 2 sentences as if they are one sentence. So a semicolon is saying, reader, these 2 ideas feel connected, even though grammatically they're 2 different sentences. So one way to think about a semicolon for me is to think about driving in Philadelphia. I'm not saying that Philadelphians are bad drivers, but I will say that they don't take the stop sign very seriously. So when Philadelphia drivers see a red light, they stop, right? And a stop, full stop, car's not moving, that's a period. But what do we do when we see a stop sign? Well, we acknowledge that we should stop by tapping our brakes. So our brake lights go on, but the car keeps rolling. We roll right through that intersection. And that's basically what a semicolon is doing. It's acknowledging that you should stop, but it's continuing to move forward. By the way, I do not suggest doing this because you can get a ticket for it. But nonetheless, this is a helpful way for me to think about what it is that a semicolon does. It's a sort of rolling stop, tapping the brakes, but continuing to move. So let me show you what a semicolon does between two sentences. So I wrote here, I know it's time for you to stop and consider what I just said because I've completed a grammatical sentence. Now that is technically a complete sentence, right? And on this side, we also have a complete sentence. However, I'm not done yet with this thought, and I need you to stick with me a little longer so I can say what I need to say. These are two separate sentences, but I'm allowed to stick them together if I put a semicolon in here. Of course, the other thing I could do would be to put a period in there, in which case I would just use a capital H. So, I also want to talk to you about something else that a semicolon can use. This is not as common, but sometimes we need to use a semicolon in a list. Usually, we use commas in lists, right? So for example, this sentence might say, the four major African language groups are Niger-Congo, comma, Nilo-Saharan, comma, Caucasian, comma, and Afro-Asiatic. So in other words, we have four items in our list, and we separate them with commas. But imagine that you have a list that has within it more information, maybe even more information that has commas in it. In that case, to make things clear, you want to separate the items in your list with a semicolon. So I might say, the four major African language groups are Niger-Congo, such as Wolof, Ijo, Swahili, and Yoruba, right? Semicolon. In other words, all of this is one item in a list. And you see all those commas and how confusing it would be if I put a comma here, right? Here's the next item. Nilo-Saharan, such as Lugbara, Maasai, and Nubian. Oh, Nubian and Fur, sorry, I forgot to add that. Okay. Here's my next list. Caucasian, such as Nama and Maligo. Next item in the list, and Afro-Asiatic, such as Somali, Tuareg, and Arabic. Oh, I said that wrong. I'm really sorry. It's Tuareg. Okay. So, just so we're on the same page, a period goes between two complete sentences. And whenever you start a new sentence, you need a capital letter. A semicolon goes between two sentences, but because you're taking two sentences and turning them into one, you do not put in a capital letter. And that's it. I hope it's helpful. If you have any questions, please bring them to class and make sure that you understand this video well before you take the quiz on it. Good luck.